Welcome back to our Just Help series. I'm Grace and I'm here with Geoff. And today we're talking about the moment where workplace relationships begin, which is the hiring process. So not just the interview, but everything around it, like job descriptions, job ads, offer letters, and the contract terms that people often sign quickly. This matters for employers because a clean process lowers risk and helps you hire better. And it also matters for employees because the earliest promises and paperwork often end up shaping your day-to-day reality. So Geoff, before we jump in, just some quick housekeeping. This is general education, not legal advice, and it does not create an attorney-client relationship. Let's jump in. Geoff, when people call you after something goes wrong in hiring, what do you wish had happened earlier?
I wish they had slowed down and written things clearly. A lot of hiring issues come from two places: vague expectations and inconsistent communication. Third place is reference checks, but we'll cover that another day. The bottom line is if the job description doesn't match the real job or the interview process is informal and different for each candidate, you can end up with disputes about what was promised or why someone was selected or rejected as compared to somebody else. At best, you end up with miscommunication, frustration, misalignment, and at worst, you end up with discrimination claims. So clear writing and processes really help both sides.
Mm-hmm. So let's start with job descriptions. Employers hear job description and they might think it's just HR paperwork, and employees often see it as marketing. What is it really?
A shared reference point. For employers, a strong job description forces you to define what the role actually needs and what it actually is, what success looks like, and what tasks are truly essential. It's also important in the disability context in terms of identifying what the essential job duties are, which you will need to know in the context of discussions around reasonable accommodation, which is a topic for another day. For employees, the job description is a preview of what you'll be evaluated on. It's also a great tool for asking smart questions like, which of these responsibilities is most important? Or what does a successful first 90 days look like for you?
Mm-hmm. So what should a good job description include?
Keep it practical. It should include the role summary, just one or two sentences on the purpose of the role and outcomes of that role. It should include core responsibilities, the main duties that define that role. It should include what are required versus preferred qualifications, whether it's education, professional experience, and separate those. It should include work location and schedule expectations, whether it's on-site, hybrid, fully remote, if there's travel, what the hours are like, all of those things. It should also include reporting structure, who the role reports to, who the key collaborators are. And it should include the essential physical requirements, only if they are truly job-related, though.
And what should it not include?
Yeah, this is where there are a lot of issues. So avoid items that are not job-related, but still screen people out inadvertently, like overly rigid degree or educational requirements when equivalent experience would do. Also avoid cultural language that can be read as excluding people like young and energetic, or anything that hints at preferences about family status, health, religion, sex or sexual orientation, or similar personal characteristics.
So then switching to the employee perspective, what's the best way to read a job description without overthinking it?
Yeah, treat it like a negotiation prep sheet. If the responsibilities are broad, ask or be ready to ask which ones are daily versus occasional. If the schedule's vague, ask what flexibility actually means in practice. If you see other duties as assigned, very common, you still want to understand what the real baseline is.
So then for the job ad, the public-facing version, what do you think separates a strong listing from one that creates problems?
So actually, before we get to ads, let's talk about referrals. Tap into your own network. It's a great way to screen candidates and get high quality candidates and avoid candidates that are not so high quality. Then you get to ads. So before you write the ad, think about where you're going to post it, what makes the most sense. Then you want a clear and accurate ad. A strong job listing tells candidates what the job is, where it is, how it's measured, and what the pay range is. It avoids hype that creates mismatched expectations and later frustrations. For employers, think of it as the first compliance step and the first trust step.
And what should employers include in a listing?
A couple things: an accurate title, the top responsibilities in plain language, the requirements that are truly needed, the location and schedule, the pay range and basic benefits in California now. In fact, you are required, if you have 15 or more employees, you're required to include salary ranges and job postings and provide pay scales for current positions upon request. So you need that in there. Also include the hiring process basics, like whether there's a skills test or multiple rounds of interviews, things like that.
Okay. So what should employees watch for as those kind of yellow flags in an ad?
Yeah, so employees should watch for things like a vagueness around pay, vagueness around hours. If there's language around along the lines of must be willing to do whatever it takes, that can signal unclear and unhealthy boundaries. Employees, it's your first signal of how organized the employer is. Also, if the ad reads like 3 roles combined, it might mean the company is understaffed or the role is not really defined.
Sometimes employers want to add personality, saying things like, we're a family. Is that type of thing a problem?
It can be. My advice is oftentimes it's better to just have a culture that embraces that instead of coming out and saying things like that. It's not because warmth is bad, but because that family language can blur professional boundaries. A safer approach, again, is to develop that culture and describe the behaviors that you value in the ad, like respectful communication, clear expectations, teamwork, things like that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thanks, Geoff. Let's move into the interview itself. From the employer side, how do you run interviews that are both effective and compliant?
A big challenge. First thing is use structure. Decide what skills you're testing, ask the same core questions for the same role, and score the answers consistently. That's good management, and it also reduces bias. Then you also need to train your interviewers. Most problems come from casual conversation drifting into personal topics. You can be friendly without asking personal questions.
Yeah. Can you give us some examples of what those good questions are?
A job-related, behavioral-based question along these lines. Tell me about a time you handled a difficult deadline. What did you do? Or what does success look like for you in your first 60 to 90 days? Or walk me through a project where you owned the outcome. Or something like, this role requires X. Describe your experience with that.
Getting into the uncomfortable part, what questions are potentially problematic?
Anything that touches on personal characteristics or can be interpreted as ineffective screening. Examples include questions about family plans, religious practices, health conditions, where somebody is really from, or anything that suggests you're trying to learn that protected information. So race, religion, national origin, sex, sexual orientation, those types of things. Be careful around language-related questions as well. So don't ask things like, is English your second language? If you hear somebody speaking with an accent. Instead, if communication, verbal communication is a key aspect of the job, and it is in most, ask something along the lines of, knowing the skills and duties of the job that this requires, you think you're able to effectively engage in day-to-day communications, so that the question is skills-based, not origin-based.
Yeah. So let's do a rapid fire of topics that come up all the time. Salary history. Can employers ask about that?
No. The safer approach in California is to avoid salary history questions and focus on the role's pay range, your role's pay range, and the candidate's expectations. You as an employer can say, here's our range. Does that align with what you're looking for? It really keeps the conversation forward-looking, it manages expectations, and it's legally compliant.
Mm-hmm. And for employees, if you get asked that anyway, what is a calm response?
Yeah, that can be challenging, of course. So the best thing to do is redirect and politely and calmly say something along the lines of, I'd rather focus on the range for this role and my expectations based on my experience. I'm targeting X number of dollars, or whatever the terms are. Keep it simple.
So for someone who says that feels like a scripted response, do you think that's still effective?
Yeah, I know it sounds a little scripted, but it is effective for the right employer. Absolutely. It sends a message about boundaries. It sends a message about your confidence as an applicant, as an employee early on. If they won't respect that, then it's good to know now, and you can make an informed decision about what your next steps are.
Yeah. And so next rapid fire topic, family. Can employers ask about kids or childcare?
Don't. If your concern is scheduling, ask the job requirement question instead. This role sometimes requires early mornings or late meetings or weekend work. Are you able to meet that schedule? Ask that, and ask it consistently of all candidates instead of about kids and family or parents sometimes.
Yeah. What about religion? Can employers ask about that?
No. Again, stick with questions around availability. If scheduling issues come up later, handle it through a consistent process, through that interactive dialogue similar to disability issues.
hmm So with the disability or medical conditions, where do employers tend to get in trouble there?
Yeah, when they ask medical questions or try to diagnose themselves or ask about specific diagnosis, believe it or not, that happens. Keep it to whether the candidate can perform the essential functions of the job, which again goes back to the description that we talked about. And whether or not they can do that with or without a reasonable accommodation. Don't ask about specific conditions.
What about that friendly small talk at the start?
That's often where accidental risk, unintentional risk happens. If you're an employer, keep small talking neutral. If you're an employee and you get personal questions, you can gently redirect to the role. So some safe or friendly small talk icebreaker questions. How are you today? What is exciting you these days? Things like that.
Yeah. And then from the employee side, if you're asked something like, why are you leaving your current job? What would you say and what would you not say?
The truth. Stick to the truth. Something truthful, concise, and forward looking. You're looking for growth, better alignment, new challenges, or a different environment. Really avoid venting or sharing confidential details.
Can you give us an example of what a good response might look like?
Yeah, sure. Something along the lines of, I learned a lot in my current role, and now I'm looking for a position where I can take on more ownership in this specific area. This role seems aligned with that. So something like that is positive and job focused.
Yeah, that makes sense. So now to a sensitive one, if an employee was terminated after engaging in protected activity and they're about to sue or they're negotiating a settlement, should they disclose that in their job interviews?
This is one that comes up more often than you might think. In general, people are not required to volunteer that information. From a practical standpoint, disclosing it can invite bias and really derail the interview. It's usually better to keep the conversation focused on the job. If you're worried about references or a background check, you can plan for that by choosing references carefully and preparing a neutral explanation for why you left. If you're in an active dispute, getting individual advice is important because the best approach depends on the specific facts.
So then from the employer side, if you suspect that a candidate has a legal dispute with a past employer, can you ask about that directly?
Look, that information is rarely helpful. Your goal is to assess whether they can do this job. So focus on the skills and the experience. Digging into disputes can lead you into areas you don't want to be making decisions about. And it also leads to potential discrimination claims.
Okay. Let's say that the interview went well. Now the offer letter comes in, often with attachments or policies. Geoff, what should employees look for in, let's say, green flags and red flags?
Green flags are clear terms and consistency with what you've been told and what you've read in the job description and the position posting. You want to see the title, the start date, the pay rate, bonus or commission terms, if that's applicable, benefits information, work location, who you report to, those types of things. Red flags are vague compensation language or missing attachments that are incorporated by reference. The red flags include overly broad confidentiality language or restrictive clauses that affect your future work. Another red flag is when one thing is promised verbally in the interview process, but the written offer says something different. Another thing to watch for and be aware of, not that it's a red or a green flag necessarily, is arbitration agreements. Is there an arbitration agreement? Again, that's not good or bad per se. That conversation's for another day, but it's something to at least be aware of if it's there.
And then what should employees ask before they sign?
Ask for anything that's referenced but not attached, like a commission plan, a bonus plan, or a handbook. If those types of things are not included, ask to see them and confirm the basics in writing. If it's important, it should not live only in a conversation.
And for employers listening, what should you include and what should you avoid?
In that offer letter, include the essentials. Keep it readable and be consistent with what you've said. Avoid copying terms from the internet or from GPTs that don't match your practices. Avoid making promises that you can't support, like guaranteed raises, guaranteed schedules, guaranteed promotions. Most employment is at will, which means a lot of things to a lot of different people, but at its core, one of the things it means is that the position can change. So you don't want to restrict yourself overly by promising guarantees in schedules or promotions or duties.
And employees often hear it's standard, everyone signs it. Should employees accept that at face value?
No, not necessarily. Standard does not automatically mean harmless or acceptable. It may be the standard for that company, but it can still be negotiable or something that needs to be clarified. So even if you don't negotiate, you can often get written clarity on what a clause means in practice, and that can be helpful.
So a quick overview with non-compete. So people often hear non-compete and then start panicking. What should both employers and employees understand about that just at a high level in California?
So at a high level, non-competes in California are not enforceable outside of some very narrow circumstances that are generally not applicable to most employees. Non-compete restrictions are generally illegal. Employers, instead of focusing on non-compete language, should focus on protecting legitimate business interests and trade secrets through confidentiality clauses, confidential practices, and careful handling of sensitive information. Employees should still read restrictive language carefully because even though it's unenforceable, it can create friction and uncertainty later. So if you're in doubt, ask for clarification before signing if you have restrictive non-compete language in there.
I see. And employers who want to protect customer relationships, what's the practical alternative there?
So for protecting customer relationships, client relationships, strengthen internal processes, limit who has access to sensitive information, document the existence of the client relationships, and use tailored confidentiality obligations. You want to build a business that doesn't depend also on one person or just a couple people holding all the relationships. That's where risk can come in when those people decide to leave. So maintain the relationships if they're important to you. Be involved in those relationships. Yeah.
We are at our final topic of today, employee versus independent contractor. What are the basics of the ABC standards? Explain simply.
Yeah, so there are several different frameworks depending on the specific context that you're working with. There's workers' comp, standard employment, different frameworks. In California presently, what's known as the ABC framework is really the most important one as a practical matter. It helps determine whether an individual worker, and this is an individualized analysis, whether that individual worker is a legitimate independent contractor or an employee, no matter what the parties call it and no matter what the parties want. Simplified, the ABC standard looks to whether the worker is genuinely independent, whether they're doing work that is outside the company's usual business, and whether they have an established business of their own in that field. They've got to meet all three of those to be an independent contractor. They've got to be independent, they've got to be doing work outside of the company's usual business, and they've got to have an established business of their own in that field, the services that they're offering. One of the key practical points here and takeaways is that labels do not matter when it comes to what employers or employees say. A contract can say independent contractor, but if the day-to-day realities that the company controls the schedule, the tools, the method of work, like in an employee relationship, that creates risk. A good example for when the same person is an independent contractor and could also be an employee in a different context is my dad, who's a painting contractor. He has his own business, and if I were to hire him to come paint my law office, he would show up with his tools, his ladder, he would show up on his schedule and do the job without any control by me other than maybe telling him what color to paint the office. That first A standard's met. He is also providing a service that is outside the scope of my legal services. So the B standard is met. He's doing something outside of what I'm doing. And in terms of the C standard, he is doing this for other people. He's established in this trade. He has many different clients. That's an example of where my dad, the painting contractor, is a legitimate independent contractor under the ABC standards. Now flip that and put it in the context of one of my other clients that has a paint contracting business and has many employees. If my dad went to work for that company, they would control his schedule. They would provide the tools. They would provide the ladders. They have that control. The A standard is not met. That's a problem in and of itself. He would be providing the same type of services that they are in business to provide. The B standard is not met. Even though he might still continue doing side work on his own and offering that painting service to others, he did not meet the A or B standards in that context. He is not an independent contractor. He's an employee in that context. Hopefully that helps break down the ABC standards in a very real and practical way, where you have the same individual that in one context can be providing services that are independent contractor services, and in different contexts, same services, same person, he is not an independent contractor. He's an employee.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Thank you for sharing that example. That definitely helps break it down and make that concept a little more digestible. And as we're talking about independent contractors, should there be a contract with independent contractors?
Absolutely. And this is something that is not difficult to do, but you do need a contract with independent contractors. It spells out the ABC standards for number one, as well as how they're going to get paid, the fact that they're providing their own insurance, things like that. There should absolutely be a contract with independent contractors.
Makes sense. Okay, thanks, Geoff. So today was the whole hiring runway, from job descriptions, job ads, interview, how employees can answer tricky questions, and what to look for in offer letters, including at-will and contractor classification basics. We covered a lot today. If you're an employer, your action step is to standardize your interview questions and audit your offer letter for clarity and consistency. On the other hand, if you're an employee, your action step is to slow down at the offer stage and ask for any missing documents, especially anything that is tied to pay. Geoff, thank you so much for sharing all of this information with us and for making this practical.
Yeah, thank you, Grace. These early steps really prevent a lot of problems later on.
Absolutely. Next episode, we will cover workplace basics in California. Things like exempt versus non-exempt classification, break rules, overtime, required postings, EDD basics, and what protected concerted activity means even in non-union workplaces.
Sounds good.